There is one argument you hear more than any other right now about artificial intelligence. It goes like this. This isn't the dot-com bubble, because this time the technology is real. It works. People use it. That argument is correct, and it is not a defense against losing money, because there is a case where the technology was more real and more permanent than anything the internet produced in the 90s. And the people who financed it were still destroyed. It happened in Britain in the 1840s, and one of the people who lost money on it was Charlotte Bronte. By the early 1840s, Britain had proved that railways worked, not theoretically, commercially. Journeys that had taken days took hours. It was the most important infrastructure change since roads. So capital did what capital does. It rushed in. Parliament approved each line individually, so we have a precise record of the frenzy. In 1846 alone, Parliament passed 272 separate railway acts, authorizing roughly 9,500 miles of new track, in a country that already had a working network. At the peak, railway construction was absorbing somewhere around 5 to 7% of Britain's entire national income. Not 5 to 7% of investment, of the whole economy. Clergymen, widows, shopkeepers, and yes, novelists put their savings into companies whose lines existed only on paper. And here is what makes this uncomfortable. They were not stupid, they were right. Britain's rail network was largely completed in this period, and much of it is still in use today. They were right about everything except whether they would personally get paid. So how do you lose money betting correctly on the most important technology of your century? 4 ways, all mechanical. The first is duplication. Capital did not flow to the best line, it flowed to every line. Multiple companies were authorized to build competing routes between the same pairs of cities. The country did not need 3 railways between the same 2 towns, but 3 sets of investors funded them anyway. When they eventually competed, they competed on price and destroyed each other's margins. Roughly a third of the mileage Parliament authorized was never built at all. The second is leverage, in a form most people did not understand. Railway shares were bought on a deposit. You paid a fraction up front, often 10%, and stayed legally liable for the rest, payable whenever the company called for it. On the way up, this was wonderful. You controlled £10 of exposure for £1 of cash. On the way down, the calls kept arriving from companies desperate for capital, addressed to people whose shares were now worth less than what they still owed. That is how ordinary families were ruined, not by the share price, by the funding structure. The third is that the money ran out. The Bank of England raised rates through 1845 and into the crisis of 1847. Cheap capital had made the arithmetic work. When it stopped being cheap, the flow of new money supporting share prices simply stopped. The fourth is fraud, arriving on schedule. George Hudson, the railway king, controlled around 1,000 miles of line and was celebrated as a financial genius. In 1849, it emerged he had been paying dividends out of capital, paying investors with their own money and calling it profit. Fraud is rarely the cause of a mania. It is a symptom of the stage where returns have to be manufactured because they cannot be earned. By 1850, railway shares had lost roughly half to 2/3 of their value from the 1845 peak. Individual companies did far worse. Here is the ending most tellings leave out. The railways worked, the network got built, freight costs collapsed, labor became mobile. Every optimistic claim made in 1845 turned out to be true. The gains were enormous. They just went to different people. They went to passengers who got cheap travel, to manufacturers who got cheap freight, and to the second wave of owners who bought the assets out of distress. The people who did not capture the gains were the ones who financed the construction. This repeats across canal booms, telegraph booms, and fiber optic booms. Transformative infrastructure tends to be valuable to society and a poor investment for whoever builds it first. So let us look at the current numbers without predicting anything. Global AI spending is reported to be heading past $2.5 trillion in 2026, up around 44% on the year. The largest cloud companies have poured so much into data centers that free cash flow estimates for the group have collapsed towards nothing. In July 2026, that started to be questioned. When a Chinese lab released a competitive model, the semiconductor index fell 10% in a single week, its worst since April 2025, and something on the order of $3.3 trillion of market value came off the sector. Microsoft recorded its worst month since the year 2000. Now run the 1840s checklist. Duplication, present. Genuinely useful technology, not in dispute. Cheap capital as the enabler, with rates no longer falling as expected. Present, present, present. The fourth item is the live one. If the price of AI capability keeps collapsing because of competition, the users win enormously, and the people who paid for the compute do not. None of this is a prediction. The 1840s are not a forecast, and anyone selling you a historical parallel as a certainty is selling you something. What the 1840s destroy is one specific argument, that real technology means safe investment. Britain proved those are separate questions. You can be completely right about the future and still be the person who pays for it. The question is not whether AI is real, it is who ends up owning the track. If you want more of these, subscribe. Next time, Napoleon tried to defeat an economy with a blockade, and it destroyed his empire instead.